The laughter cut through the chamber like a blade, sharp, dismissive, dripping with arrogance. Tommy Tuberville leaned back in his chair, shoulders shaking as he mocked the words of a woman who refused to bow. The room shifted uneasily. Some looked away. Others smirked nervously. But one face stayed steady, Jasmine Crockett's. Her eyes didn't flinch. They locked onto him with the calm fire of someone who had been underestimated her entire life. In that instant, the contrast was unbearable. On one side, a senator reveling in ridicule, smug in his comfort, convinced that laughter alone could drown out truth. On the other, a daughter of sacrifice, standing in silence, letting his mockery hang in the air like smoke before a storm. The crowd didn't know it yet, but something unforgettable was about to unfold. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't trade insult for insult. Instead, she reached down into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, worn at sauk. The edges, creased by years of folding and unfolding. The chamber quieted. The laughter stopped mid-breath, replaced by a hush that carried its own weight. Her fingers smoothed the page. Her voice, steady as steel, broke the silence. These are the words of a man who fought when his country called. My father's words, from Vietnam. Every head turned. Every ear leaned closer. And for the first time in the debate, Tuberville's grin faltered. His eyes darted, his smirk thinning, as if the paper in her hands carried more power than every jeer he had thrown. There it was, the moment no one saw coming. The room itself seemed to freeze, suspended between arrogance and truth. The letter, still unopened to the audience, had already changed the balance of the fight. And yet, Crockett paused. She let the weight of the moment linger. She let the senator sit in silence, waiting, while the viewers at home felt their own hearts rise in their throats. Because this wasn't just politics anymore. This was blood, sacrifice, history, and she was about to unleash it with the force of generations behind her. But to understand why this single letter silenced a senator, we have to go back to the beginning. To understand the force of that moment, you have to understand the man who laughed. Tommy Tuberville didn't arrive in Washington as a statesman. He came as a coach, a showman, someone who had made a career of winning games, not shaping policy. He branded himself as an outsider, a fighter, someone willing to tell it like it is. But underneath that veneer lay a pattern, mocking those who disagreed, dismissing questions he couldn't answer, brushing off the very responsibilities of the office he swore to uphold. By the time this debate rolled around, his reputation was already a storm cloud. He had held up military promotions for months, punishing officers who had served honorably simply because he wanted leverage in a culture war. He treated sacrifice as bargaining chips, reducing decades of service into political pawns. Veterans' families watched in disbelief. Soldiers serving overseas knew their futures hung in limbo, not because of strategy or security, but because one senator wanted to make a point. And it wasn't just the policy, it was the tone. When Tuberville laughed that night, it wasn't just at Crockett. It was at the very idea of dignity. It was the kind of laugh that said, your words don't matter, your history doesn't matter, your story doesn't matter. In a country built on sacrifice, on families who have buried their loved ones beneath folded flags, that laugh cut deeper than a political jab. It mocked service itself. The debate hall reflected the larger fracture of American discourse. Cameras rolled, capturing not just words, but the energy in the room. Divided, tense, fragile. Half of America was exhausted by the shouting, desperate for leaders who spoke with clarity and respect. The other half had grown addicted to mockery, fed on outrage like it was oxygen. That night, Tuberville fed the beast. His laughter wasn't just arrogance, it was performance. He believed humiliation could be entertainment. But across from him stood a woman who knew the stakes were bigger than sound bites. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just sparring for political points. She was carrying the weight of a father who had once Been a young soldier in the jungles of Vietnam, writing home to loved ones he wasn't sure he'd ever see again. She was carrying the echoes of families who know that freedom is not free, who live with the scars of war long after the last bullet has been fired. This wasn't just politics. This was about respect. Respect for the men and women who bled in foreign lands. Respect for the families who held their breath through each deployment. Respect for the idea that America's promise is only as strong as its commitment to honor sacrifice. So when Tuberville laughed, it wasn't only Jasmine Crockett who felt it. It was every veteran who remembered being spit on when they came home from war. It was every immigrant who worked 3 jobs to give their children a chance. It was every child who grew up hearing stories of service, only to see that service mocked on national television. And yet, in that very fracture lay an opportunity. Because arrogance blinds itself to danger. Tuberville believed his laugh was the final word. But Crockett knew something he didn't, that dignity carries its own power. And as Tuberville smirked, few knew the story Crockett carried inside her. A story decades in the making. Before the laughter, before the smirk that turned a Senate hearing into a spectacle, Tommy Tuberville was known not for legislation or leadership, but for football. He strutted onto the political stage as though politics were just another game to coach, another locker room to command. And in many ways, that's how he carried himself. From the sidelines to the Senate floor. He built his brand as a winner. A man who could mold athletes into champions, who could rally a team to victory. But in the glare of Washington, the habits that looked commanding on the football field began to look shallow, even reckless. The cocky sound bites, the swagger, the refusal to admit mistakes, traits that energized fans in stadiums, translated into arrogance when lives, policies, and futures were at stake. When Tuberville first ran for Senate, he pitched himself as the ultimate outsider. No ties to Washington, no insider deals, just a plain-spoken coach who'd stand up to the elites. It was a message tailor-made for an era of anti-establishment rage. But behind that outsider image, contradictions piled up. He railed against career politicians, even as he leaned on political donors and backroom networks to fuel his campaign. He promised to defend the military, then turned around and froze promotions for generals and admirals, jeopardizing readiness for his own grandstanding. And the gaffes. Oh, the gaffes. They weren't slips of the tongue. They revealed something deeper, like the time he confused the 3 branches of government, or the moment he couldn't name a single U.S. ally during an interview. Each time, the smirk appeared again, as if ignorance could be brushed off with charm. His strategy was clear. Laugh it off, keep moving, never apologize. But arrogance, when worn too often, becomes a mask that slips. During debates, Tuberville leaned on mockery rather than substance. He interrupted, dismissed, sneered. His default tactic wasn't to persuade, it was to belittle. For supporters, it was entertainment. For critics, it was exhausting. And for those caught in the middle, Americans who longed for a politics of dignity, it was infuriating. What made it worse was the hypocrisy. He spoke of honoring veterans, yet held their careers hostage. He claimed to fight for the little guy, yet defended billionaires and corporate donors at every turn. He posed as a man of the people, yet his disdain for ordinary struggle showed whenever he waved off hard questions. Tuberville relished the role of antagonist. He knew outrage fueled clicks. He knew laughter, smirks, and put-downs would be replayed on television and shared online. He wasn't there to build bridges. He was there to cement himself as a spectacle. In his mind, the louder the clash, the greater the victory. But there's a difference between a staged game and real lives. Politics isn't a Saturday afternoon kickoff. It's the mother who wonders if her son will make it home from deployment. It's the veteran who carries scars you can't see. It's the immigrant who still believes in the American promise, even when the system tries to break them. These aren't plays to be drawn on a chalkboard. They are the stakes of people's lives. Tuberville never seemed to grasp that. Or maybe he just didn't care. And that's what made his laughter so poisonous. because it wasn't just the sound of one man mocking another politician. It was the embodiment of a mindset that says, "Your pain is my punchline, your sacrifice is my stage dot." That is why, in that chamber, the smirk cut so deep. It wasn't simply Tommy Tuberville being rude. It was the culmination of a career built on arrogance, contradictions, and empty swagger. A man who had mocked his way through mistakes, believing ridicule was a shield strong enough to protect him from truth. But arrogance always underestimates the quiet strength of those who've lived sacrifice. Long before she stood on the Senate floor with cameras rolling and eyes watching, Jasmine Crockett was simply a daughter listening to her father's stories. Her father had been a young man when his draft letter arrived, barely out of high school, with his whole life ahead of him. Yet he answered the call without hesitation. Vietnam was brutal, suffocating heat, endless fear, nights broken by gunfire, and mornings that smelled of ash. And yet, he wrote letters home, letters that spoke of love, of longing, of duty. Letters that tried to hide the terror but carried between the lines the weight of sacrifice. He came home changed, as all soldiers do. Some wounds healed, others never did. The nightmares lingered. The silence at dinner some nights told stories louder than words. But in the middle of that silence, young Jasmine grew up learning something essential. Dignity doesn't come from mocking others. It comes from enduring hardship with grace, from holding your head high when life tries to break you. Her father wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But to her, he was the definition of strength. The kind of strength that works long hours even when your body aches. The kind of strength that tells your daughter she can do anything, even when the world says otherwise. The kind of strength that believes service is not about applause, but about honor. Jasmine carried that lesson like a torch. She studied hard, knowing that education was her way forward. She saw the inequities in her community. The neighbors denied fair wages, the children whose schools were crumbling, the families living paycheck to paycheck. Instead of turning away, she leaned in. She volunteered. She spoke out. She found her voice not in the roar of arrogance, but in the steady rhythm of truth. Law school sharpened that voice. She became an advocate, fighting for clients who couldn't afford high-powered attorneys. She stood beside the vulnerable, immigrants, working-class families, people society often overlooked, and made sure their stories were heard. She didn't chase headlines, she chased justice. And every courtroom she entered, every case she fought, carried the quiet influence of her father's letters. Service, sacrifice, dignity. When she entered politics, it wasn't out of vanity. It was out of necessity. She saw a system where too many voices went unheard, where too many people felt invisible. And she knew that if her father could endure the jungles of Vietnam, she could endure the battles of Washington. She wasn't naive. She knew politics was cruel. But she also knew that cruelty collapses in the face of unshakable dignity. Crockett's style was different from Tuberville's in every way. He relied on bluster. She relied on substance. He treated debate as theater. She treated it as a duty. He laughed at questions. She listened. Where he shrugged off mistakes, she owned her struggles and grew from them. Her calm fire wasn't weakness. It was resolve, the kind of resolve forged in a household where the price of service was lived every day. And so, when she walked into that chamber opposite Tuberville, she didn't come as just another politician. She came as the daughter of a soldier. She came carrying the legacy of a man who had faced death and still wrote words of love to his family. She came carrying the hopes of the people she represented, the single mother trying to keep food on the table, the immigrant family still believing in the American dream, the veteran who wonders if anyone remembers their sacrifice. Her presence alone was a rebuke to arrogance. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to smirk. She carried history in her very posture, a reminder that politics is not about scoring points. It's about carrying burdens heavier than yourself. And that's Why? In the split second when Tuberville's laugh rang through the chamber, she didn't waver. She had heard worse in her life. She had seen men broken by war, by injustice, by poverty. A laugh from a senator was nothing compared to the silence of a father staring into the distance, haunted by memories he never spoke aloud. Which is why, when Tuberville laughed, she didn't flinch. Instead, she reached for a weapon no one saw coming. The exchange began like so many others. Tuberville leaning forward with that familiar smirk, voice dripping with condescension, as if every word he spoke was already the final answer. He jabbed at Crockett's record, dismissed her arguments with sarcastic chuckles, and played to the cameras with the swagger of a man who believed ridicule was the same as reason. The laughter returned, short, sharp bursts meant to puncture. Her composure. But Crockett didn't rise to his bait. She didn't match mockery with mockery. Instead, she sat taller in her chair, eyes steady, voice calm. Every time he threw a jab, she answered with substance. When he waved off her points, she doubled down with facts. Where he spoke in sound bites, she spoke in sentences that carried weight. The contrast grew sharper by the minute. Tuberville, once sure of his dominance, found himself repeating the same barbs, his confidence shifting toward irritation. Each chuckle sounded less like amusement and more like a defense mechanism, a laugh to mask the fact that his opponent wasn't rattled. The room began to sense it too. Reporters scribbled faster, cameras zoomed closer, staffers whispered behind cupped hands. Something about the air was changing. Tuberville's mockery, once meant to control the stage, was starting to feel desperate, and Crockett, without raising her voice, was quietly seizing the ground beneath him. She leaned into her strength, empathy wrapped in steel. "Senator," she said, measured and unwavering, "when we speak of service, we cannot reduce it to pawns in a political game. Service is not something to laugh at. It is not bargaining fodder. It is sacrifice." Her words hung in the air. No flourish, no theatrics. Just truth, delivered with the gravity of someone who understood its cost. Tuberville tried to brush it off with another smirk, but it faltered. The cameras caught it, the momentary tightening of his jaw, the shift in his eyes. The laugh came, again, but softer now, strained. For the first time, it sounded hollow. And Crockett didn't let the silence slip. She let it build. She let the weight of her words settle in the room until the laughter no longer filled the space. What remained was the undeniable sense that the senator's armor was cracking. Viewers at home could feel it too. The anticipation, the schadenfreude, the thrill of watching arrogance unravel under the steady gaze of someone who refused to bend. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. And then, silence fell as Crockett unfolded a worn piece of paper. The chamber was tense, every eye fixed on Jasmine Crockett. Moments earlier, laughter had echoed, a smug, cutting sound that rolled off Senator Tommy Tuberville's lips like a taunt meant to sting. But Crockett didn't flinch. She let the arrogance hang in the air, let it expose itself. And then, with a calmness that unnerved her opponent, she reached into her folder and pulled out something no one had expected. It wasn't a chart. It wasn't a memo. It wasn't even an argument. It was a letter. The paper looked fragile, almost translucent with age. Its edges were worn, the creases deep from years of folding and unfolding. It wasn't just a document. It was a time capsule, the voice of a young man frozen in ink and memory. Crockett held it gently, almost reverently, and the room instinctively leaned closer. Even the air seemed to still. "This," she said, her voice low but steady, "is my father's letter. He wrote it from Vietnam." Her words dropped like stones in water. Ripples of silence spread across the chamber. Tuberville shifted in his chair. His smirk tried to hold, But something in his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Crockett unfolded the paper slowly, as though reintroducing her father's voice to the world. She began to read. "Dear Mama," she said softly, the intimacy of the words cutting through the room. "It's hot here. The days all blur together, but I keep thinking of home. I keep thinking of you. Sometimes the nights are the hardest. When the jungle is so quiet you can hear your own heart beating. I try not to be afraid, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. Still, I believe in what we're doing. I believe in the country that sent me here. And I promise you this, I'll come home with honor, no matter what happens." The words hit with the weight of truth. They weren't abstract talking points or partisan slogans. They were the voice of a soldier, young and uncertain, carrying courage through fear. Reporters stopped scribbling. Cameras tightened their focus. Even those in the room who had come only for spectacle felt a chill. Tuberville's smirk twitched again, but this time it faltered. He looked away. He adjusted his cuff. The man who laughed with ease now looked for somewhere, anywhere, to place his eyes. Crockett's voice grew steadier. "I think about Jasmine," she read, her cadence quickening slightly. "She's so young now. But I dream of her growing up, strong. I hope she'll know that her daddy fought for something bigger than himself. I hope she'll never let anyone tell her she's less than she is. And I hope she'll carry her head high, no matter who tries to laugh her down." The room froze. Goosebumps. A hush that felt heavy, like history was holding its breath. Crockett paused. She let the silence speak. The contrast was brutal. Tuberville's laughter moments before now suffocated under the weight of her father's words. She looked back down at the letter. "Sometimes I wonder if people back home understand what it's like here," she read, her tone dropping lower, deeper. "The mud, the sweat, the fear. But I don't fight for glory. I fight because I believe we all have a duty to one another. That's what makes us Americans. Not laughter, not mockery, but sacrifice." Her gaze rose and locked on Tuberville. His eyes flickered, his posture stiff. For once, silence gagged the senator. A murmur began in the chamber, faint at first, then building. People felt it, the moral tectonic plates shifting. Phones lit up as staffers messaged their teams. Viewers at home leaned in closer. Something was happening that couldn't be spin-doctored away. And then came the final blow. "I don't know if I'll make it home," Crockett read, her voice almost breaking. "But if I don't, I want Jasmine to know this. Her father loved her. Her father believed in her. And her father gave everything, so that she could live in a country worthy of her dreams." The words lingered, suspended in air like a hymn. Crockett folded the paper carefully, as though tucking her father's spirit back into rest. She set it gently on the desk. And then she looked directly at Tuberville. "Senator," she said, her voice sharp, clear, undeniable, "my father bled for this country. He carried honor through jungles you'll never walk, through nights you'll never endure. So when you laugh at sacrifice, you don't just laugh at me, you laugh at him. You laugh at every soldier who carried this nation on their back. And that, sir, is why your laughter ends tonight." The chamber gasped. The silence deepened. Tuberville's face was locked in an unnatural stillness. The arrogance washed out of him like color drained from a canvas dot. No charts, no statistics. No clever lines could have done what that letter did. It was dignity, annihilating arrogance. The cameras caught everything. Crockett's unshaken resolve. The folded letter resting like a verdict between them. The senator's smirk finally broken. The energy in the chamber shifted. The audience knew it. The staffers knew it. The viewers at home felt it in their bones. By the time she finished, the internet had already exploded. The moment Jasmine Crockett folded her father's Vietnam letter, the chamber still vibrating with silence. The outside world caught fire. Within seconds, Clips of the exchange ricocheted across social media. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, every platform lit up with the same image. Tuberville's smirk vanishing, Crockett's voice steady, the folded letter resting like a gavel between them. Hashtags surged. Letter from Vietnam trended within minutes. Dignity over mockery wasn't far behind. Veterans across the country posted photos of their own service letters, their own folded papers carried across decades, honoring Crockett's father by honoring their own. One tweet read, "My dad wrote me from Korea, still have his letter. Jasmine Crockett spoke for all of us tonight." It racked up 100,000 likes in less than an hour. Memes erupted too. Tuberville's laugh frozen beside Crockett's. Words, captioned with lines like, "Arrogance meets history," and "When receipts come from the battlefield." The internet can be cruel, but on this night, its cruelty had a target. Not the woman who stood dignified, but the man who thought laughter could diminish sacrifice. Cable news pounced. The clip rolled in prime-time loops. Tuberville's chuckle, Crockett's calm, the words of a soldier echoing across decades. Anchors framed it as a cultural pivot point, a reminder that the theater of politics can still stumble into something raw and real. Commentators, some usually hostile to Crockett, shook their heads, conceding the sheer power of the moment. "You don't beat that," one pundit said. "You don't laugh your way out of that letter." On Facebook, veterans organizations issued statements praising Crockett not just for invoking her father, but for reminding America what service truly means. Posts read like salutes. "Tonight, we stand with Repsa Crockett. She carried the voice of every man and woman who wore the uniform." YouTube reaction videos popped up by the dozens. Progressives cheered, immigrants wept on camera, conservatives struggled to spin the optics. One popular channel titled their upload, "The Laugh That Died in Silence." And ordinary Americans, the ones who don't usually post, who don't flood timelines with politics, found themselves typing through tears. Parents wrote, "My son's in the Marines. Thank you for speaking truth." Children of veterans wrote, "My dad never talked about Vietnam. Tonight I felt like I heard him." Tuberville's team scrambled, releasing statements about respecting all service members. But it was too late. The internet had written its verdict, and no press release could rewrite the images burned into people's minds. A senator laughing, a daughter silencing him with her father's words. The ripple effect didn't stop online. The next morning, newspapers ran headlines with a cinematic rhythm. The letter that stopped the laughter. Editorials praised Crockett for grounding politics in something deeper than partisanship. At a time when words are cheap, one columnist wrote, a letter from Vietnam cost a man his smirk. Veterans' halls replayed the clip on loop. Coffee shops buzzed with conversations. Churches worked it into sermons about dignity and sacrifice. Even classrooms discussed it. Teachers showing students how history isn't always locked in textbooks, but can re-emerge in a single trembling piece of paper. And through it all, the emotional current was the same. Validation. People felt seen. They felt part of something larger than themselves. The laughter had been directed at one woman, but the answer belonged to everyone who ever carried the weight of service, of family, of identity. Tuberville's name trended, but not with the respect he once craved. He became a meme, a cautionary tale. Crockett's name trended with reverence, and in that strange electric space between humiliation and honor, a nation remembered the difference between performance and principle. But Crockett's final words weren't just about Tuberville. They were about all of us. As the echoes of that moment rippled across the nation, Jasmine Crockett did not stop at silencing a senator. She understood that her father's letter was not only a personal relic, not only a dagger pointed at arrogance, it was a mirror held up to America itself. She reminded the chamber, and everyone watching, that patriotism is not measured in laughter, nor in snide remarks hurled across polished tables. Patriotism is sacrifice. Patriotism is carrying a rifle through the mud, writing words of love and fear from a battlefield halfway across the world, hoping your child will grow up in a nation worthy of the pain. In that instant, she reframed the entire confrontation. Tuberville's smirk had symbolized something bigger, the way politics too often treats service and struggle as props in a performance. But Crockett's calm, her letter, her voice, they cut through the noise. They said, "No, dignity is not a prop, sacrifice is not a punchline. Family legacy is not for mockery. The lesson was simple but profound. When arrogance meets humility, humility endures. When mockery confronts sacrifice, sacrifice speaks louder. And when a senator's laugh collides with the words of a soldier, history doesn't remember the laugh, it remembers the letter. She closed her remarks with a universal truth. Service, she said, is what binds us. Whether it's service in uniform, service in our communities, or service to our families, it is the thread of dignity that holds this nation together. And when we lose respect for that thread, we begin to unravel who we are. Her father's letter became more than testimony. It became scripture for a fractured age. Veterans heard their own voices in it. Immigrants heard their parents' sacrifices echoed in those lines. Young Americans, often cynical about politics, saw that authenticity still has the power to stop arrogance cold. Crockett's calm fire transformed a laugh into a lesson, a mockery into a movement. And as she walked out of that chamber, she carried, not just her father's words, but a nation's renewed belief that dignity can still triumph over derision. It's why this debate will be remembered not for Tuberville's laugh, but for a daughter's truth. Tommy Tuberville laughed. He thought mockery could diminish dignity, that a sneer could drown out sacrifice. But Jasmine Crockett showed the world what happens when arrogance collides with legacy. With one worn letter from Vietnam, a father's voice silenced a senator's laugh. That's the story you just witnessed. Not politics as usual, not sound bites or spin, but a daughter lifting her father's truth above the noise. In a chamber built on speeches, it was a soldier's words, written decades ago, that delivered the knockout blow. And that's why this moment matters. Because it wasn't just about Tuberville, it wasn't just about Crockett, it was about us, about what we choose to honor, about the kind of America we decide to be. Do we reward arrogance, or do we stand with dignity? Do we let mockery echo, or do we raise the voices of those who gave everything for the freedoms we hold? If you believe this story deserves to be remembered, don't let it stop here. Share this video, subscribe to the channel, add your voice to the movement that says service will always outweigh mockery, that dignity will always defeat arrogance. Because long after Tuberville's laugh is forgotten, Crockett's truth will remain. And you, by carrying it forward, become part of that legacy too. The senator's smirk was temporary. The letter's message is eternal. And tonight, it belongs not just to a daughter, but to every one of us.